Sanbonani Ufahamu listeners, my name is Kamogelo Tinyiko Theledi and I'm the non-resident fellow for 2022-2023. On today's episode, we'll be discussing the representation of minority groups in the South African media landscape. Now, sociologist Stuart Hall terms representation as the ability to describe or imagine. Hall states that representation is important because culture is always formed through meaning and language. In this case, language is a symbolic form or a form of representation. Now, conversations globally around representation of minority groups have been ongoing, but have they proven to bring any changes to the media industry, and how have these groups been perceived? Now, to unpack this, we're joined virtually by activist, author, and founder of I Can Be campaign, Mpho Tjope, and seasoned journalist and presenter Rhulani Baloyi, as well as artist and creative producer Kamohelo Sebudi. Thanks for joining us on Ufahamu Africa, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for inviting us.
Mpho, I'm going to start with you. As an activist and a person living with albinism, in your opinion, how has the media portrayal of people living with albinism created any societal stigmas?
Wow, it has done, I would say, a lot of damage, but recent it has been improving. Simply because in movies or television or soapies, even in dramas, they always represent persons with albinism in killings. You know, it's when you see a person with albinism, you know there will be a killing along the line. It never does represent a person with albinism as an advocate, as a doctor or anybody because we are different professions and are a business person. So when the danger about one narrative is that it forms perspectives of people. When they see you, they think, oh, it's only a killing. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't highlight the killings or any bad narratives, but I think there needs to be a balance in the narratives. Yeah. So I think that one. And also in newspapers, they will always say albino. They wouldn't say a person, even the right terminology. And I think it's very important in the disability area where when you speak of people, you say a person with albinism and not just albino and it also speaks to how our native languages or cultural languages always say albinism, like in isiZulu it's inkau, which is direct translation is a monkey. When you speak to other, it says a curse, it says it. So it's always bad names used for persons with albinism that needs to change.
And you're speaking of something that needs to change. How would that change look like in an ideal world? How would that look like for you in representing people living with albinism? Now, you're saying it's how they're referred to, firstly, saying someone is living with albinism and they're not an albino, but also you've referred to the killings that happen, that they're often seen as people who are used for muti and so on and so forth. So how would that portrayal look for you in the media space?
I think for me, it should be balanced. The same way as, you would take a fully pigmented person or a black person, even if we are all black, but let's say fully pigmented. You'd have an actor acting as a hobo, somebody would act as a doctor, somebody would act as a president. What that means is that in this black body, there's different spaces, but when you just give one person, if you give one narrative in a story, it does more damage, because what you're saying is that then when you see a person with albinism, you know that there will be a killing, and it's not what the entire population with albin or the community of albinism are experiencing as a whole. Yes, there are some who are graduates, there are some who are into different spaces, and so it's very important to narrate it as life is, you know.
You often speak in your engagements how you were the only one living in albinism in your community. Do you think if there was proper media representation of people living with albinism, that would have made your upbringing and of those like yourselves different in terms of you seeing people who look like you?
Yes, most definitely it would have made it uh, it would have broadened the perspective because, I mean, I'm from a small community where I'm the only one with albinism. So when you see different people and you see different representation, it shows what you can be. I mean, is the reason why that the campaign that I formed is entirely based on that, to say there's more to albinism than just what people say and what the myths are. There are people who are doing great, who are doing amazing work, and we are not saying that there are no challenges. There are, but it's not the only thing that is there. So yes, it would have made a world of difference. But it has benefited me in a sense that I'm able to use my experiences and change others' lives in South Africa and even in the entire continent, actually, as I'm involved in many things around the continent.
You just
Thank you.
touched on your campaign, that the I Can Be campaign. Let's speak on that. What drove the establishment of that, and what kind of work does the organization do?
What we do, what drove it was my experience. As the only person with albinism, and I had to be in grade 10 actually to see another person with albinism, and my experience also at university had informed me that no, I needed to do something about it. And so what we do is I bring professionals with albinism from different spaces, like your lawyers, your doctors, your engineers, scientists, anything that you can, any career that you can think of, all with albinism from different walks of life. And now we do it in one province per year. So in that particular province, we bring 50 to 100 learners with albinism from different schools, special schools, and your other schools. You know, your uh, I forget what the mainstream schools. Thank you. Yeah, the mainstream schools, and then we bring them in one room. We bring these 10 professionals so that they can actually speak to these learners, that they can be whatever that they want to be. And we also group them, and they have to see what challenges they are facing at home and what do they think the solutions are. And others say what challenges they experience at schools and what are the solutions, because half of the time we have our own solutions to the challenges we face. So I didn't want to prescribe to the learners what they need to do. So they will come up with solutions, and they hear what professionals have went through, what they have done, and how they overcame the challenges that they are currently facing. And with this campaign, we also pushes for those learners who wants to be part of this I Can Be campaign to go back to school, and we facilitate going back to school. We assist for them to get glasses and sunscreen, because at times people drop out of school based on the fact that they have to walk 2 kilometers, and in the sun it causes blisters, it increases the chances of cancer. So that's how we bridge the high number of learners with albinism dropping out of school. And we also speak at that particular school so that we normalize the environment, so that the teachers and learners in that school appreciate what albinism brings, and what they can do to accommodate a learner. For an example, just printing in larger font, having glasses, having sunscreens. These things may seem small, but they are what can actually separate a child from dropping out and a child from being a graduate. And we also apply for bursaries for the learners who are in matric, so that they can be, currently we have more than 9 graduates from the program, and others are going through, others are at varsity. So we're doing great, in that sense.
Lastly, we live in a space of social media. It's part of our day to day. And it also forms part of what influences what we see on our televisions, what we hear on our radios. Often conversations are sparked on social media. How do you think, or if there is any impact that social media has had in your activism? Has it been positive? Has it been negative? Has it made the cause of your cause rather more visible, more reachable to different people? What effects has the dominance of social media had on your activism?
Social media has played a huge role, has played a positive role. For an example, I've had people contact me, young mothers. That's another program that we have. Young mothers, like you find a person, you'd never know how you will be you'll be a parent of a child with albinism. So all these young parents, or it's the first time you're having a child, they inbox me. Sometimes they've seen me on TV and they inbox me. So I have a group, because of how they contact me in Facebook or via Twitter. I've managed to group them together. They have a WhatsApp group where they advise each other, and I add to their group, even though I'm the only guy there. So sometimes, it's just women, so they'll sometimes bash men. But I understand it's their platform, and so that's one example. Another example is that we've seen different lives of persons with albinism coming through via social media, and it helps change perspective. I mean, you TikTok, you see people dancing. There's been a trending video of a person with albinism, a learner, who has been dancing nicely, and it changes perspective of persons to say, oh, there are people with albinism who are doing this. So it has done a lot of help. And again, because it's not necessarily owned by, you know. Editors would be telling you this is how you do things, so you find that there's more voices coming through, so it has done amazing work. Yeah.
Thanks, Mpho. Thank you. Now, Ru, in 2005, you became the first blind person on South African TV, on a TV platform. And I think that was a big one. What impact do you think that had on people living with disabilities actually watching someone who's living with a disability and actually on a public platform like the SABC?
Actually, a lot of mothers, I would meet a mother in a shop or at a church, whatever gatherings, and they would say to me, after watching you on television, I was able to say to my child, if she can be on television with this disability that you have, um we can be able to take you to school. I've had a lot of parents saying to me, if it wasn't for you, our children would not be how far they are, because we were able to go out and seek help for them, especially with children who are born with disabilities. It starts at the hospital. What do they say to you when they give you a child to take home once they realize that your child has a disability? What advice do they give you? Because my mom told me that the advice they were given was that just let her grow up, and at the right time, we will show you a school where she can go to. So it starts at the beginning. And then there's this other lady I met recently. She lost her sight when she was already at university. And she was telling me that um, in her community, there was this organization, which I'm a board member for that organization, the South African Mobility Blind Trust. She was able to be connected with them, and they helped to reorientate her. She went back to university. She graduated. Now she just found a job in government. So sometimes it's mostly about parents who are able to tell their children to say, do you see her? She probably came from somewhere. And for me, the story is not actually about me being on television. It's a story of my family, that they were able to be convinced by the doctors to say, this child is going to be able to do what everyone else is doing. We will show you the school, we'll help you with the applications, and we'll help you to take the child there. And because my grandfather believed in them, and my grandmother, I was told, she cried and she said, how do you take my child to school like that? And And now when I was able to buy my grandmother sweets, I would say to her, so you were crying and now you are able to place orders for sweets when now because I can work. And she says, because I didn't know. I said, imagine my mom died a while ago. I would be sitting here with you, my brain rusting, whereas I could be working.
Yeah.
So for me, the story is about the advice that people are given when you are born with a child with a disability. What is the community reaction? Because of course it is a breaking story that a child with a disability has been born in that home. Either a child has albinism, a child is going to be a wheelchair user. Everyone will talk about you. But how does the community encourage their children? Do they encourage their children to play with you or to run away from you? So it starts at an early age. Because, I mean, there are people that were in the same class together. And now they keep on reminding me that, remember when you came back from school, we would discuss the literature, the English literature, what you were reading. And we found that you were reading the same thing. And now we're able to tell our friends that actually we were at school at the same time as her. And she actually went to a proper school where they were teaching them things that they were teaching us. And so you start realizing that inclusion of people with disabilities, it starts at an early age. And because by the time we get to universities, you find that the community of people with disabilities is 0.01%. And we have to integrate, we have to be integrated with everyone. Sometimes people will receive you well, and sometimes people won't receive you. So for me, when I got the opportunity to work on television, it was a plus for me because when I was at university, I worked at campus radio and I just wanted to be on radio. So when I started working on radio as a journalist, I thought my presence and my ambitions were complete. And when I was approached to audition for Shift, I don't know. I just said, okay, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it's okay. And then when it happened, I realized, oh, actually, I can do more than radio. I can do television. And then I started going for cast for adverts. I've never gotten one. And I think, I mean, people in the industry, our industry is very rough. Everything is driven by the bottom line. I mean, why wouldn't you have a woman who's blind advertising washing soap? I'm just giving an example.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you have someone who's blind advertising a car? I mean, I'm not going to sit in the driver's seat because that's going to tell the wrong story. I cannot drive a car. But me as a passenger, as someone who appreciates it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm just saying people need to think beyond what they're thinking. Why you cannot use me to stand in a classroom? Because I'm a qualified teacher. I'm a qualified teacher. I just chose not to teach. But I can stand in a class full of learners who can see in an advert. And Mpho was speaking about acting earlier. I agree with Mpho. I mean, why don't you cast someone who's blind to be a receptionist in a soapy or in a drama? If that's what we do in real life. Most of these things, like the economy is the one which is holding us back. And if we're not included in things like advertisements, we want the economy will also reject us. I mean, the struggles that I go through when I have to buy certain things, when you're trying to buy insurance for your vehicle, you're trying to buy even a car, when you're trying to go through your daily transactions, when you do your shopping, you realize that even people in the shops are not trained to assist people who cannot see. I mean, these touchscreen machines that we find at filling stations and all these other things, these things are very disabling. You're actually forcing me to say, if I say to my driver, let's go put in petrol, I must give him my PIN code, because those touchscreen things, they you have to see where because they don't have a talking thing,
Yeah.
like my phone. So I have to give someone my PIN code to put it in. And I think it's things that are not thought through. We are members of the economy. We also have vehicles. We need your petrol. But how do we access it with those things? You see, those machines that have a dot on the 5, those are very easy to use. I can navigate. As soon as I find a 5, I know where the rest of the keypad is. I just feel that especially private companies, they're very scared to hire people who are blind. I don't know why. They think maybe we're extra expensive, but it's not really true. If I can do the job like everyone else, and I know I can, why don't you give me a chance? They just don't want to. People are selfish. They don't want to give you a chance. They get your CV and they ask yourself, how are we going to do this? But they don't call you to try to invite you for a pre-interview or a pre-audition to try and ask you, since you can't read auto cue, how are we going to work with you? I think the most important thing is just for them to ask.
But let's touch on that. Since you cannot read autocue, I mean, you are on television.
Yes.
Most of these shows run on autocue. You are cued in as to this is when you go on ad break. These are the numbers. These are the social media handles. This is what's coming up. That's how presenters stay in tune as to the progression of the show. Now, as someone who is blind, how did you manage anchoring a show not being able to see? Like how did you navigate that space in a sector or an industry that is not as welcoming, like you're saying?
Well, you use your brain. I had to remember the phone number. I had to remember the SMS number, the Facebook page, the Twitter page. I had to remember all 4 of these. And I had to remember what the question of the day is. You have to remember everything. Even, when you're interviewing people and you're sitting, you have about 4 or 5 guests. I had to remember who's on my right, who's on my left, and what are they representing? Is it someone who's a doctor? And a doctor in what? I had to remember their names, their profession, and why we brought them to the show. So it's all about, you forget everything out, you leave everything out of your brain, and then you just focus on what you're doing. I always say that the problem with people who can see is that you guys, everything you rely on what you can read. And with us, like with me, if I know I'm going to need this person, I'm going to need their phone number in the next hour, I just memorize it and I know I will remember it without having to go scrolling through my phone. Your memory, my memory is my greatest friend.
Do you think government is doing enough to ensure that, we have a sector of arts and culture, Department of Arts and Culture. Do you think they're doing enough to include people living with disabilities within our television, our radio, and our creative sector?
Well, government can only create the laws. They've created the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. They've created the Employment Equity Act. They've created labor laws which are supposed to accommodate everyone. The issue is their monitoring, is their policy, is their evaluation that employers are making use of the rules and the laws that have been created. Is there an evaluation? I mean, for example, I don't want to mention anyone by name. Let's say you have some of these SOEs. They have 50 people with disabilities who are either blind or they are wheelchair users. They're working in their call center and they say, oh, cool, we have 50 people. Government needs to start asking, okay, what are they doing? Which of them are in junior management? Which of them are in senior management? Which of them are in top management? Which of them are if it's an engineering company, how many of them are in your engineering department? Did you try and find someone with a disability who can work with that at that level of engineering? If it's in broadcasting, do they ask how many of them are on your radio stations, are on television? How many of them are on your social media? How many, like those questions are never asked. Then you end up seeing blind people just being clubbed. You have 50 or 60 of them in every province, in the switchboard, operating the switchboard or in the call center. Then you say, we have done what government wants us to do. So we need to start going deeper into say, okay, we have these people, but what are they doing? What positions are we hiring them on? I go to this websites that advertise positions and jobs in different places. You hardly see a one that says we are looking for someone with a disability, but people do advertise to say that we will look for, will prioritize previously disadvantaged groups. Once they get a black person or a black man or a black woman or someone who's Indian or colored, they say, oh, we're cool. So I just feel that even our own black leaders, leaders as employers, they are not doing much to ensure that they do not. Because for me, it's reverse discrimination. You as a black person, you didn't want to be discriminated after 1994, but you're still discriminating against people with disabilities. So there's still a long way to go to get people with disabilities in industries. And the other problem which I see is that the whole thing that, if I decide I'm going to hype up Mpho on my social media pages, then Mpho is going to be the in-person. Everybody wants Mpho because Mpho, now everyone knows him because Rhulani is on Twitter, she's on WhatsApp, she's wherever, and she's been able to say, look at this man, look at what he is doing. That's how it works. And if no one promotes you, no one will want you, no one will invite you for anything. And because people, like, no one goes out of their way to try and profile people with disabilities like they would. You guys, know how to play with each other on TikTok. Oh, everyone wants to be this person. Everyone wants to be like this person. But how come we don't glamorize? We don't glamorize people with disability. Or for example, you were commenting about my hair. How come no one has ever taken a chance to say, let's use it to advertise our hair products?
Yeah.
But you get people, you give them weaves, and then you let them advertise your hair products.
So it's an issue of inclusivity, but it's also an issue of blind people or people with disabilities rather are still sidelined, and they're still not seen as capable enough to lead positions and sectors that normal-bodied people are leading and are in.
Yes. And I just want to say that to all the people, all the bosses in the private and the public sector, and even in our industry, in broadcasting, who have decided to give a person with a disability an opportunity, I say you are brave. Because I know you did not get support to all your colleagues. Possibly people in HR didn't even support you. And I say you need to start spreading the gospel, to say, you know what? I have this person. They work as hard as any other person that I work with. And you have been brave. You took the step. You took the risk. Employing anyone is a risk. I've said in interviews where, like, I wasn't sure if the right person that I rooted for was the right person. Employing anyone is a risk. So if you think we're a risk, then take a risk on us like you're doing it on other people.
That's true. That's true. Kamo, now you're very open about your art, about your sexuality. On your Instagram, you can be avant-garde at sometimes. You can be, you can be mellow. You can channel whatever character. In your opinion, has mainstream South African media done enough to truthfully portray the lives of those who are part of the LGBTI plus community?
I don't think enough will ever be enough to begin with. And so, yes, I don't think they have done enough. I think it's always in a very controlled delivery. You can tell your story, just needs to be in a certain way. And in a lot of instances, it's just very much laced with stereotypes, And so, no, not enough has been done.
What are those stereotypes?
Off the bat, it's the overtly feminine, I'm going to wear skirts, or I'm going to toss my hands in the air, just what you assume would be queer, and not acknowledging that queer exists in very different forms for different people as well.
Is that because of a red tape that exists, or is it because they're selling what people actually want to see? Do you think people are interested in finding out the other stories of people with who are in the LGBTI community, or is it a thing of they are selling what people want?
So I think it's a number of things. So number one, it is the red tape. I've sat in rooms where you pitch something queer and you're told that, okay, that's just a bit too much. You need to decrease it a little bit. It's not entirely palatable to the audience, right? So red tape is number one. And number two, I think it's them trying to appease the masses to some degree. When you consider how we've grown up and the people we grew up around, they only know gay or lesbian as a certain thing. And so if you present it in a different form, it feels like it's something completely different that they can't take. So for the time being, I'll say it is red tape and what you assume consumers want to see.
Now, we live in a country where we have freedom of expression, right? However, we often see reports of hate crimes against people in the LGBTI plus community. What role, if any, should the creative sector play in highlighting these crimes, but also speaking up against them?
I mean, so I can only speak from a film and television maker's perspective, right? I think you have to find different ways to continue teaching. I myself am a victor of these instances. I don't like saying victim. I think it's a horrible little phrase. When I went through that particular thing, I took time to myself to sort of get the headspace and heal in some kind of way. And when I felt like I was okay, I went onto Instagram and spoke about it. I think if you do go through my Instagram, you get the idea that everything is always okay and it looks okay. But there was a one time to say, okay, we need to actually talk about the things that we go through. So finding different ways to educate, and I think it needs to be in the most authentic way. We're at a point where we're trying to avoid playing into the stereotypical tropes, right? So don't portray queerness as constant rejection, as hurt, but this is also part of who we are as well. And it needs to be shown in some degree. This word that we use in TV, raunchy.
Raunchy?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Snacksanyana, so man,
Snacks.
I don't know how to describe it, but like showed in its truest nature, right?
Yeah.
And I think that needs to be a thing too, is that we need to see these things as they happen and how they happen, and also show the implications of that. You beating me up for who I am plays a different role to me than what it does for you. And so somewhere, somehow, someone's homophobic dad needs to understand what this means for me.
When did you know you were different? Like, when was that moment when I think we all don't realize our imperfections until someone points it out. We don't look at our differences or notice our differences until someone points it out, or until we integrate with another part of the world that wasn't part of our daily. When was that moment for you when you realized you were actually different compared to what a boy growing up in Bloemfontein was supposed to look like, ideally?
Yeah. So I think very, very early on, right? Early as in the point in your life where you start to have your own thinking process per se. I started gravitating towards women a very, very long time ago. So from the beginning, I wanted the dolls. As stereotypical as that might sound, I did want the dolls. I didn't want the clothes or anything, but this particular energy made more sense for me. Till this day, my closest friends are females, or women identifying people. And so from a very young age, I have pictures where I'm posing with my hands on my waist at the age of 6. And so, yes, you do have people pointing out differences, but I think the toughness was in the accepting it for myself. I knew it was there for a very long time. Just a matter of how do you get to a point where you are okay with who you are.
Now, we live in, I'd like to say, a somewhat conservative country, right? As much as we have social media and there's a lot of conservativeness in how we move. We're not at a speed as like your other countries. For instance, if you look at drag culture in the US compared to drag culture in South Africa, it's very different.
Absolutely.
I've only been to one drag show and one drag bar, whereas if you go to New York, you might find several of them, right? How do we navigate telling your story as a queer African in a conservative country like ours?
So despite how conservative we are, we do have a market as well. right? So I think more than anything, give us the time and space and the funding to tell our stories. There are people that want to hear them and that want to see them. Just a matter of being given the time and space, and again, the funding. Yes.
The funding. Do you
Yes.
think there's an othering when it comes to that distribution of funds?
Yeah, to some extent, yes. And this is us going back to red tape again. Our industry has had and still does have a lot of gatekeepers. And in a lot of instances, these are old, not just black, but men that decide things amongst themselves, and that's just it. Luckily, we are approaching a time where, in fact, we just got into a time where people that are in the lead are different people that are giving us the time and space, but the gatekeepers have always been the issue in that regard.
Well, I'm going to bring you back in on this one. Gatekeeping. Have you faced any form of gatekeeping when it comes to either applying for funding for your campaigns or trying to promote your books or trying to promote any activism work? Have you experienced any gatekeeping within the industry?
Yeah, there is definitely gatekeeping, but it comes in a different form. I think for us, for me, it rather comes in a form of, they would be like, okay, we don't want this kind of story. We want a story that we want. They would want a story where it suits them. If it doesn't suit them, if you are saying, okay, I want a story of a person with albinism who's doing this and that and this, they would then say no. But they would want, it's the same as interviews, they would want you to speak said things. I remember a lady once said, they were interviewing her, and so they said, so tell us about the pain of growing up. But this girl is born, I think, 2000. So the challenges that were faced by people in the 90s or the 80s were not there, and she had already many people with albinism in the home, so she was protected, so she didn't have negative stories, and it was a challenge. So they said, no, we cancel the interview, because somehow people want what they want, and they want narratives. So that's how they control funding also. They want you to, they go with prescriptions. Okay, if you do this, but if you don't want to tell a story where you are a victim, then it's a bit of a challenge, you know.
Rhulani, do you think that's what people want to hear when it comes to you? That every time they speak to you, they want to hear about the sad story? Like, they don't want to know, oh, you've traveled to this country, or you have bought this, or you have this. You actually have normalcy, some form of normalcy.
Okay, this other day, a colleague of mine hosted me on her radio show. And do you know what the callers were saying? That guest of yours, she sounds like someone who grew up in privilege.
No.
That's what they said. And I laughed.
Okay.
And then I'm like, okay, I don't know what is their definition of privilege. I grew up in Limpopo in a small village called Ilim, where we didn't have power until the 1990s. We didn't have a phone at home. It was just a normal home where parents woke up and went to work like everyone else. Maybe my self-confidence is the one that makes me don't focus on those students in class at university when the lecturer said, divide yourself into groups of 4, and no one wanted to sit with me. For me, that's not the focus of my story. I'm not defined by rejection. I'm not defined by discrimination, you know. And if that's what people want to hear, fine. I mean, that's another story. If you call me to your show and you want to know through what my journey has been like, I have a right to choose to tell you what I want to tell you. But I cannot be angry with those students. I don't even know who they were, but people who do not choose to be with me in their group until the lecturer put me in a specific group. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I focus on people who were my friends at varsity, people who we went clubbing with. Yes, I did go clubbing. Yes. Yeah. I focus on people who took me to do naughty things that young people do when we played pranks on boys. Those for me are what created me and made me. So take me along to tell my story the way I understand it and the way I want you to know it. Don't call me to say, we want you to come and tell us how you were forgotten at a bus station and you didn't know where you're supposed to go. You're not going to get that story, because I grew up in a family where I was the first grandchild. So the other ones, when they came, my young cousins and siblings, when they came, I was already there. So I cannot I come from a home where I was misunderstood. They were forced to understand me because they found me there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Kamo, with you,
Yeah.
do you think it's the opposite, that people who are part of the LGBTI plus community have to be over the top? Like, you can't just be normal, or you can't just be, or have a sad day, or have a normal story. You always have to be the life of the party, or portrayed in our media as the life of the party. I've seen in how our game shows have guests, right? They'll have your male, your female, maybe add someone who's racially ambiguous, but then they have to add someone part of the LGBTI plus community to
Add spice.
to add
In inverted
spice.
commas. Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that pressure that you always have to be that character, and that's the only character or version people often accept?
Well, not for me per se, but to speak back to what Mpho was saying, it's a real thing, right? Is that also when you do pitch for things, it's, you can't just come with a story and say, here's a story about two boys that are just in love. Somebody needs to be coming out, somebody needs to be rejected, somebody needs to be abused. And that is how you get your funding. That is how you get your story to get commissioned. But in a personal capacity, no. I'm going to give you me as I come in any day. And that's just it. So if today I'm sad, I am going to be sad, and you have to deal with it. And that's just that. Luckily, I don't have a lot to be sad about. So in a lot of instances, you're going to catch me very happy and in a generally good mood. And I think it's also in how I was raised. My mom did not say don't show weakness or whatever, but it's that, like, you're not just the only one going through stuff, right? And so if you can make space for someone else, make space for someone else. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And also, what Kamo is saying is right, because if we're sitting as girls, we're telling stories of those boys who mistreated us. There's no specific story for Rhulani because she's blind, she was badly treated. You find that the same guy who treated me badly is going to go and treat another woman who can see badly. So we should not try to create a separate script for people with disabilities.
Yeah.
Because, like, for example, if you're going to put together a panel of people to talk about something, why don't you just invite me to be part of that? I mean, if you're going to want to talk about the media industry, why don't you just invite me to give my personal opinion about that? Like, I would not want to join an organization only to be a disability specialist. I'm not a disability specialist. I'm just someone who has a disability. And you may find that my understanding, I have not studied disability at university. You may find that I have a better understanding of other things other than issues of disability. And it doesn't mean I have to present a show which speaks about issues of disability only, because other people expect you to focus on that. And I have a lot to offer. I mean, when I was a junior reporter, people used to be shocked when I would rock up and with my microphone wanting to do that interview with them. Like, there was this guy who was a prosecutor at the Joburg High Court. We never met before, but one day he was working on a case where I was assigned to do, and I didn't go to the court that day. Then I called him. I said, I need, what happened? Because I sort of knew that the case wasn't going to sit. So he just told me, no, it was postponed to this day, and these are the reasons. Then I wrote a story. Then the following, it went on for a while with different stories. I would call him and say, hey, do you know anything about this case? Do you think it's going to sit? So one day there was a trial that I was covering. There was this other guy who was tried for stealing metric papers. This thing has been going on forever. So I called him one afternoon and said, listen, I'll be coming to the Joburg Magistrates Court. There's a trial that I'll be covering. Just check where the specific trial is going to be sitting. Come and say hello. So, and then in the morning, I called him, I told him what I was wearing. So he came during the trial. So he came and sat with us on the media bench, and then we're just like talking. So fine. The following day, I called him. The trial was, and said, "Oh, thanks. It was great to meet you." It was a white young man, white young prosecutor, and a black blind journalist. He says, "Can I please ask you something?" I'm like, "Yes." He says, "I didn't know you're blind." I'm like, "Yeah, but I'm a journalist." It's like, I went home and I told my mom.
Because I think it's different, right? And it just speaks to how there needs to be more of it. Right. I think there needs to be more of Mpho, there needs to be more of Rhulani, there needs to be more of Kamo, in terms of that in the next few years, it shouldn't be a phenomenon. It should be normal. That it should be, she's an actor. There's a rom com, and there's a blind lady in that rom com, and it's not played by a actor pretending or portraying a blind character. It's actually by a blind actor. But lastly, on your side, what message would you have for someone like yourself listening to this podcast? Something perhaps you wish you had known while navigating the early stages of life?
Um, Messages that I have is, I think parents need to love their kids regardless, even if they don't have a disability or they have a disability, because I think that's what kept me, because I knew I was loved. And that helps a lot, because it builds self-confidence. It makes even when you are rejected, you know that there's somewhere where you are not. And also, people must practice. I know we say inclusion, but I believe, and I was saying this to the Mandela Washington the other time leaders, that we need to be intentional about inclusion. You can't just say people are included. People who have been excluded for 100 years, even on an application, if you say people with disabilities are encouraged, that's not enough. You need to go and find people with disabilities and make sure that you interview them. Because if you just say that they are encouraged and you have not, the platform has never been there for them, then it's a problem. The intentional inclusion even in advertisement of gender-based violence, because I mean, if you look at it, we have an image of able-bodied woman as a abused woman, but people with disabilities are more vulnerable to be abused. Even on adverts like that, on serious campaigns, they are not included. So we need to be intentional about our inclusion. Thank you.
Thanks, Mpho. Kamo, for you?
I think more than anything, you're okay. You're normal. It's going to be okay. Keep fighting for yourself as hard as you can. In the nicest way, you only have you. So you need to make things work.
Rhulani?
I just want to say to all employers in all the sectors, guys, we pay tax like you guys. So we keep this economy running. We buy your brands. So please include us in employment opportunities, in any other opportunities. Like, think as to how, as Mpho said, find us. We are here. Some of us, we are on social media. We are easy to find. But do research. Why don't you go to universities and say, I'm looking among my young graduates, I want to get people with disabilities. Most universities in South Africa, they have disabled students units. They should be able to give you referrals, and you choose which one you think goes with what your company does. So go out, do your own research. Go to institutions, look for us. There's a lot of drama students who would want to be actors and actresses. Find them. Go do anything and everything. And we want to get your phone calls. I get happy when I get referrals to someone. People call me and say, I work in HR. I'm looking for such a person. And I'm able to say, go this place and find, you will find who you are looking for. Or I know a friend, or I know someone who will be able to help you. It's so nice to get a phone call from a parent asking you, how should I help my daughter? Or you get a call from someone in a company to say, who do you think we can get for this position? We'll give you referrals. Let's include each other, because at the end of the day, the economy does not say this is a money from a disabled person or not. It doesn't say this is money from a member of the LGBTQI or someone who has albinism. It is our economy. We all must run it together, and let's do that.
Yeah.
Inclusion, inclusion, inclusion. Well, that's all we have on today's episode. Let's engage on social media more about this topic. Until next time, Nisaleni kahle.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Ufahamu Africa. You can find more episodes, show notes, and transcripts on our website, ufahamuafrica.com. This podcast is produced and managed by Megan DeMint, with help from production assistants Chukwufunanya Ikechukwu, Alex Kozak, and Ami Tamaklo. Our non-resident podcast fellows are Bamba Njaye, Maseke Rioba, Takono Priscilla Sempere, and Kamogelo Tinyiko Theledi. We are generously supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York and receive research assistance from Cornell University and the University of California, Riverside. Our music is courtesy of Kevin McLeod. Until next week, Safiri Salama.